Welcome to this tutorial. My name is Bola Ologundudu. In the last two tutorials that we've been working on this database administration training, we were able to set up the Active Directory. I walk you through the installation of Active Directory. Then we set up the prerequisites for us to be able to join our SQL test 01 and SQL test 02 to the Active Directory. We're trying to mimic the enterprise setup that is out there in the world, in the real world. When you are joining a new company, there's going to be Active Directory and your SQL environment is going to be joined to the domain. Then in the last tutorial, we configure all the necessary prerequisites that we're going to be needed in order for us to configure the always on availability. That is going to be part of this installation, but we want to make sure everything is set up at the beginning so that by the time we start installing our SQL and try to enable the failover cluster, everything will be set up. Now, the continuation in this tutorial, we're going to go into test 01 and installed SQL Server and also add our database. If we have enough time, we're going to add the server into a cluster role. We're going to enable cluster role in a server so that we're going to be able to work and enable active always on availability. So thank you. Let's go to the test environment. Okay, we're in a test SQL test 01. We're going to make this full screen. So I mentioned earlier that we're going to go ahead and start setting up our clustering of the two SQL Server environments that we have. But one thing I realized is most companies, they must have had their SQL setup. Some of them already have SQL 2014 or SQL 2019 that they already set up in a single server that they might want to join that into the always on group. And so in that case, that means the SQL is already installed, and after that you now want to add it to the always on. So what that process is going to look like is you're going to have SQL Server already installed. Then you're going to enable the window clustering in those two servers or the servers that will be part of the always on. Then you now cluster them together. So in order to meet that process and follow the same way that happens in most of the companies, we're going to go ahead and first install SQL Server on this server. So we're going to install it on test 01 and test 02. So I've already downloaded the developer version for SQL Server 2022, and that is already been added to the server. So you just need to go to the Microsoft SQL 2022. If you want to download it, let's open the Explorer quickly. So you're going to search for SQL Server 2022. Developer Edition. Click on the download, SQL Server download. Then you're going to come under the SQL Server on-prem download, or you can just come to the developer edition. So because this developer edition is almost the same thing as SQL Enterprise, but this is meant for the developer because you cannot use this in a production environment. But just for you to be able to test, train, and understand how SQL Enterprise works. That is why the SQL developer is provided for the developers and the SQL DBAs. So you're going to click on download here. And once you download, you're going to follow the download instruction to download the ISO. Then once you have the ISO, then you can now add that to your SQL Server and start the installation, as we're going to start right now. So the first time you had the drive to go on that my PC, you had the ISO, you're going to have this folder here that you can double click on. Then this is going to start the installation for you. SQL Server installation is one of the main responsibility of the DBA. You have to understand the best practice and the best method for installing SQL Server. You want to make sure that all the drives are separated. You do not want to install the log drive. You do not want to put the log and the data drive together. You want to have drive for each one of the files that are within the SQL Server. This makes it easy for you to manage your SQL and improve the performance. When you get to an organization as a DBA, there's going to be a need for you to create a new SQL Server, right? The first thing you want to do while asking from your from the infrastructure team, whenever you need to set up a new VM, is tell them that these drives need to be added to the VM. You want to have a drive for the data drive, for the log, for the backup, and for the temp DB. So this is going to make it easy for you during the installation of SQL to set each one of the file within SQL Server Engine into each one of these folders. If this is not added, if you don't add a different file like this, you're going to end up installing all your SQL in the local drive, which is not good. Can you imagine if your local drive is corrupt? All the data, everything is going to go with it. But if you have all your SQL Server data in a different drive, even if you have an issue with your local disk, all you have to do is to reinstall Windows, reattach the drive, and your database is back up and running. So that is why it's a good practice to make sure that all your drives, all your files, the SQL Server files are separated in a different file, in a different drive. Now, this is the primary responsibility of the DBA. You want to make sure all these are spelled out for the infrastructure teams whenever they want to create a new VM for you. Most especially in a large organization, there's going to be like a form or like a request that you're going to make. If somebody say, okay, Mr. DBA, we need to set up a new VM for a new database for a new application. So can you go ahead and set it up? Then when you are requesting for the VM for the new SQL Server, you want to make sure that you spell each one of the drives out, that you want 5 drives added, 1 for log, 1 for data, 1 for backup, and 1 for temp DB, so that it will be easy for you to maintain your server and the performance of the SQL will be great. Okay, I want to make that clear because that is very important. It's a very good foundation to have for your SQL. If you don't lay a good foundation for it, then you're going to pay later when you start having the performance issue. Now, this is the window, the SQL installation center that opens after I double click on these CD drives. So we want to start the installation by clicking on the installation. We want to do the new SQL Server installation. So we'll click on that. So we have it. This is the SQL Server Developer Edition. If you are installing it for an enterprise, you're not going to install SQL Developer in your production environment. Don't do that. If you join an organization and you discover that they are installing, they're using a SQL Developer in their production environment, you need to let them know that it's against Microsoft rule. They shouldn't be doing that. So assuming we're installing this in an enterprise setting, you're going to select the enterprise and the key is going to be provided for you right here. So you need to select this one, select the key and check all this before you continue. But in this situation that we are using the developer edition for our training, you select on the developer, and if you click on the drop down also, you can see from this same drive we can install the express edition or the evaluation edition, which is going to be for the SQL enterprise. But we can use SQL Developer Edition because that is almost the same thing as SQL Enterprise, just that this is meant for the SQL developer. So going to click on next. Now accept the license, which is compulsory. Okay, you want to use Microsoft update to check if there's any update during installation. So that is being checked right now. So if there's any update, this is going to download it for us and install it during the installation process. Okay, so everything passed. The only thing that we got here is a warning. If you have a firewall in your server, in most organization, the firewall is being managed through the Active Directory. So most of the server doesn't have the firewall on. But if you have the firewall enabled, you want to make sure you go in there and open port 1499 for the SQL Server. Okay, click on next. Now in SQL 2022, there's a new provision that make it easy for you to use the extension, connect your SQL Server to the Microsoft Defender that is in the cloud, the Active Directory that is in the cloud, to make it easy for you to manage your on-prem SQL from the cloud. So if you already have Active Directory or any subscription in the cloud that you want to link to your on-prem SQL, this is where you're going to provide the information. I'm going to provide the service principal and the Azure subscription, so you can get all this information from the infrastructure team, because they're going to be responsible for setting up the cloud. Or if you have your Azure cloud admin, they will be able to provide this information for you. But in this situation, we're not going to go with this. Going to disable it. Going to click on next. Now, this is where we're going to select all the features that we want to install on this server. Remember, we're trying to set up always on, right? And at the same time, we're going to cluster our window later on. And we want to install SQL Engine. Now, in this selection here, we have the capability, the option to install the SQL Engine, to install the analysis, and to install the integration. But it is not a good practice to install the database engine and analysis together, because of performance issue. The two of them, they're going to be struggling for resources, and analysis can be resource intensive. You don't want that to be competing with your relational database during the transactional period, that someone is running a report on analysis and there's a transaction going on database engine. You don't want that to happen, because that is going to degrade the performance of your SQL engine. So the best practice is to install the database engine in a separate server and install your analysis on a separate server also. So I'm going to remove this. Now we're going to install, select the database engine. Then the SQL replication is needed, because we are going to enable the always on. The always on required SQL replication. And if we want to enable other high availability method, that will help us to do that. Then Full test is not that needed, but I like to select it in case I have an application that requires that. And the data quality, this is needed when you want to enable master data. This is used to clean your data, to standardize data like an address, your address, to have the state, local, and zip code. This is going to help in standardizing it. The polybase is meant for connecting to the big data from your SQL. If you want to install your SQL Server and you want that to be able to connect to any external data in like a Google Drive or any big data, then the polybase will help you to do that. But in this case, we don't need it. The other feature here is the integration service. This enable you to run the integration like a SSIS package on your server. We're going to enable this for now because this is going to help us to set up in case we want to deploy SSIS package to any of our server. But so once we enable this, if we are just installing the SQL and a standalone and not in a cluster, or not that we have the mindset of setting up the SQL always on, this will be fine. But while setting up the SQL always on, I think it's good to only install the SQL engine. Then you can set up another server that will be responsible for your integration, where you can manage your SSIS package and have a master and a cluster. And a master and a worker that will make that easy for you to manage. So instead of installing everything together in one. So, but in this situation, we're just going to focus on installing the SQL Server replication, the SQL Server engine. Then this can be installed on a separate server, and we can use that to deploy SSIS package when we need that. Now, this is the reason why we created that all these disk right here that we have. Normally we should have added additional one for the installation. So I'm just going to quickly add a new drive at the back end, because right now this is for drive data. We need another drive for us to be able to install. Instead of installing on C drive, we want to install on another drive that is not the C drive. So let me quickly do that and I'll be back. Okay, so now we have a install drive, the log drive, backup, temp, and data drive. So we're going to change all this to go into our install drive. So all you need to do is just change the last letter to D. So remember, this is necessary to prevent us losing all our data whenever we have an issue with the server. If the server crashes, we can still move this drive to another server and spin up our SQL from there. But if everything is installed on C drive, once the server crashes, everything goes with it. So you click on next. So now all our installation is going to be in the D drive. C drive just have the OS. So we're going to have maintain the default name instance, MSSQL Server, and by default it's going to pick the name of the server of your SQL test. I'm going to click on next here. Okay, so this is where we supply the account that we created earlier. We're going to grant this permission. Here we're going to look for the SQL account that we created in the Active Directory, the service account. So let's search for that. So this is the service account. Click on it. Use the same thing for the SQL engine. Find the service account here. Okay. Then we're going to provide the password. Then this is going to be automatic. You change it to automatic. You always want your server engine to start when your server restarts. Okay, so provide the password. This is the SQL account that was created in the Active Directory. So the collision. So we're going to leave the collision as they say we want it to be case insensitive. Once that is done, you click on next. So this is where we're going to decide if we want to use only window authentication or we want to use a miss mode. Most companies, they prefer that you don't enable the miss mode, but it's very important for you to be able to access your database in case anything happens to the Active Directory. And that is where the miss mode comes in. Once you enable the miss mode, you have the opportunity to have a SA account that you can use to access the database whenever it's necessary, when the Active Directory is not available, or if you have to do one or two maintenances. At the same time, there are some applications out there that doesn't support Active Directory that you might need to create a SQL account for. So if you don't enable it right here, it might not be easy for you to create a SQL account because a SQL account is being managed within SQL Server. It's very risky if the account get leaked, but it's necessary also to have it because you might want to, for you to be able to support other applications that require SQL account. So I'm going to enable the miss mode, provide a password. Then after that, we're going to add the current user. If you have the admin, I have a group for the DBA, you can go ahead and add your DBA group right here. And after that, I'm going to go under the data directory. So this is where we're going to point each one of these directory to the drive that we have in there. By default, all of them are located in the same directory. This is not good for performance. If you install it this way, your SQL is still going to work, but by the time you start dealing with maintenance or the performance issue, then it's not going to be easy because the data drive and the user drive and the log drive cannot be on the same server. So you're going to leave this in D, then the user drive has to be separated. So this is going to be for, I'm going to set that data drive here. So the data here, search for the data drive, which is right here. But in order to make it easy, because I don't want all the database to just be floating around, I'm going to create a folder within this, and I'm going to name it SQL Test 01 Data. This is very important because in some situation there might be a need for you to create more than one instances of SQL in one server. So by grouping them this way, make it easy for you to manage and support. So that is for the data. Then we're going to do the same thing for log. This is log right here. Create a new folder for log. We're going to do the same thing for backup. I have a backup drive right here. So you see, we have everything separated, the data, the log, and the backup. Then the next step is go to the temp. So you want to make sure the temp database tool is separated. So that is why we have a different folder for this. So we're going to remove the default one and add a new one. So we're going to go into the temp. Same way, we're going to create a new folder as we did earlier and name it SQL Test 01 underscore tempdb. I'm going to click OK right here. Then you just leave everything as there, default. Go to the mass dub. This is the this determines the amount of CPU that you want your your SQL Server to use. I'm going to select leave the default here. Most cases leave the default. Then after the installation, once you start using your environment, if you discover that the performance is not that good, when you start having a lot of weight that are related to the CPU or the degree of parallelism, you can go back within the server configuration and make changes. But because this is a VM, I assign only two CPU to this VM. That's why you're seeing two. Yours might be different. So just leave it the way it is and don't make changes to this. I'm going to click on the memory. The same thing under the memory, I want to pick on the recommended. This is too small for SQL. I'm going to go ahead and increase it later on, but that will be after the installation is complete. I'm going to click OK. The file stream, we don't need to enable this. I'm going to click on Next. Now, this is all our configuration, and this is configuration file. We have this configuration file created for us. If I go here and search for it, okay, see, so all our selections are here. Let's assume we want to go to another server, or we have multiple servers that we have to configure the same way. All we have to do is to take this configuration file, run it on all the server, and that will automate the server configuration for us. So just want you to know that that is possible, and that can be done by using, you come into the advanced here, use install based on configuration file, then you click on this and point it to where the file is located, and that will automatically install SQL for you. So, but in this case, we're done with all the selection. I'm going to click install. Then this process is going to go ahead and install SQL for us. Then we'll be back when the installation is done. The installation is successful. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to go ahead and restart the server. Now, once the server restarted and we're back on this, we're going to be able to continue with our installation, and that means the SQL is ready. And the next step is going to be for us to install the SQL SSMS, SQL Server Management Studio, and go and try to connect to SQL. Then once that is done, we can now start setting up our window clustering. So I'm going to restart this, then quickly I'm going to go into SQL test 02 and install SQL just the same way that we did on this server. I'm going to show you once that is done quickly. So let's go to test 02 and install SQL. All right, this is test 02. You can see right here. I'm going to quickly run through this wizard. It's the same method as we did earlier. We have the same drive, install drive, the C drive, the log drive, and everything. So just going to go through the process quickly. Click on the installation, the standalone. I'm going to select the developer edition. So there's no need for me to show this again. It's the same thing as we did in test 01. So I'm going to go through all the selection. Then when I'm ready to click on install, I'll come back on screen. Okay, so this is all the selection. I made all the selection the same way as we did in SQL test 01. So now we're ready to click on install. And like we did earlier, the installation is going to take time. We're going to restart the SQL Server after that. Then the next step is going to be for us to install the SQL Management Studio. Right now, the SQL test 01 should be up and running. So I'm going to go back into that and install the SQL Management Studio. So, okay, we're back on SQL test 01. Make this full screen. As you can see, we have our install drive. This is where the SQL engine is installed. We have our temp right here. These are all the time. This is going to be based on the number of CPU that you have. If you have 8 CPU, you should have like 8 files here. But because I have only 2 CPU, that's why you only see 2 right here. So then the backup, the log, everything is set up. Now let's go ahead and install the SQL Management Studio. So we're going to go into the Internet Explorer, search for SSMS, which stands for SQL Management Studio. SQL Server Management Studio, click on the download. This is provided by Microsoft. So select on that, click on this free download. Then we're going to download the installer for SQL Server Management Studio. So this is the client that we're going to use to connect to SQL and manage all the activities that we're going to be performing on the SQL is going to happen through this client. SSMS has been around for so long, and a lot of DBA find it easy to use SSMS to manage the SQL Server. Let's go into the download folder and double click on this installer. I'm going to close this. Remember, this is part of the DBA job. If you're lucky, some company, they have the infrastructure team that will have installed this for you. But as a DBA, you need to understand how to set up your tools. When you get your new laptop, the first thing you want to do is to install all the necessary application or necessary software if they are not already installed. SSMS is one of them, and it should be the first one you go to install, and that will make it easy for you to connect to the database, understand your environment, and know what needs to be done. Gonna go with the install. You just need to click, and the installation is gonna be completed. And like the other installation that we did for SQL, you can install this also on the D drive. You may not want to install it on C drive, but since this can be downloaded and reinstalled anytime, I don't mind installing this one on the C drive, but this also can be installed on other drive, like the install drive, which is where all your installation should go, and that will make it easy for you to recover your data or the server whenever anything happens to the server. Okay, I'm gonna pause the video and come back when this is complete. So the installation is complete. Click close. Just open the Management Studio and try to connect to our SQL. We're going to go ahead and install the same tool in SQL Test 02. In most cases, you're not going to be managing your SQL through the server. You're going to be managing it from your laptop. You just need to install it once on your laptop, and you can use that to connect to all your SQL Server that you have in your environment. You don't have to install multiple versions or install it on multiple server. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to go ahead and install it on SQL Test 02, so that if we need to connect, we can have it right there. So right now we're connecting to SQL Test 01, and we're connecting as ABC administrator. As you can see, we're able to connect successfully. You're going to go ahead and set up the SQL Management Studio on the SQL Test 02. Then we're going to come back later and start the installation of window clustering on both servers. Thank you.